And we're live with episode 5 of Beyond the Finish Line. Georgia, we're halfway to not giving up, as you so eloquently put it.
It's a little bit glass half full or I don't know, glass half empty. I'm not quite sure.
I hope it's a little bit less than half. I want this podcast to go way more than 10.
No, it's actually so funny. Someone said that to me the other day. They said, I think you repeated the stats to me this morning. It was like 98% of people don't go past episode 10, and we are at episode 5.
Yeah, let me bring it up because I looked it up. 98% of podcasts don't make 7 episodes. Of the remaining 2%, 99% of those don't make it past 10.
Well, we are both part of the 1% club, and I am in the 1% club that is going to finish episode 10, and we're going to keep going because I'm loving this.
Don't you think? I think that's it's interesting that like so many people drop out. If you think about 10 episodes, if you're doing one a week and let's just call it an hour, that's only 10 hours of your life you need to dedicate to being the 1% of podcasters on the planet, and the majority of people can't do it.
Look, you would think so, but I think maybe people just get over it. They kind of do their little thing, or maybe they just think that people aren't listening and they get a bit scared. But hey, if only one person is listening to this, and if that is my mum, hi mum. Great, let's keep going.
My mum is definitely not listening to this.
Oh, no, really. My mum loves our podcast. She's been commenting on everything.
Yeah. My mum is definitely, she probably doesn't know what a podcast is. She's just out there.
Like, I'm over it.
She's just out there on the farm living her life, mate. She doesn't mind.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So this week, Matt, I put a poll up on our Instagram asking what we thought people would
I thought you were
want
going to talk about the other poll.
Oh, sorry. Yes, we can talk about that if you want, about how Matt is the side piece to this podcast.
Yeah, it's just Georgia and this other bloke who talks in the background sometimes.
This random guy who talks nerdy stuff in the background. No, I put a poll up the other day saying, what should our next episode be? And by next episode, that was episode 5, because we have 2 more to come before this one. And I asked, what, 2, 3 more? 3 more. Go us. We've done so many so far.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I asked what was kind of 4 things. There was strength training, a beginner's guide, like a 5K guide. We had zone training, and I've completely forgotten the other one.
Strength.
No. Obviously not that important, because the one that won was what we're going to talk about today.
We only care about winners.
Exactly. Is zone training. So I am going to ask you a few questions, Matt, about zone training to help those listening at home and maybe in their car or out on their run, and talk us through what zone training is and what are the different zones.
Yeah, I think for everyone listening, this can get really nerdy really quickly, and I'm going to do my best to be concise. And
I'll do my best to pull up Matt when he's
Georgia's going to pull the reins on me a little bit. What I'm going to try and do is give you guys, so the majority of people who listen to this are beginners or like crossing into that intermediate sort of run knowledge, fitness knowledge base. I'm just going to give you guys just enough to be able to progress, and then what we might do later is do like a more in-depth one where we really sort of nerd out, and that might be a bit specific, but yeah, I think for a starting one, that's just probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think a starter's guide. I know that zone training isn't necessarily for someone who's just getting into running today, but maybe something that is easy for everyone to understand, something that they can take away and start implementing into their training.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt's just looking at me like, what are you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just like, yeah, you are on a roll. I was like, cool, here she goes. She's going to ask me a question, and then she just stared at me.
Sorry, guys. I think I just mentally blanked for a second. It's been.
Do you know what's so funny? Right, Georgia and I were just talking about this off air. She was like, someone commented on one of the reels that you look bored, and I said, the reason I'm not always like super engaged is because I have a little bit more podcast experience than Georgia. And I'm always thinking about if something happens and the conversation comes to an end or we don't get to the point, I'm trying to be 2 or 3 steps ahead, and I wasn't ready for it when it happened.
I psyched him out. It's my fault. That's my fault.
Got in my head.
Okay. Okay, let's get into it. I'm so sorry. We can just cut that out, I'm sure.
We're
We'll
definitely not editing that out.
the dead air. All right, run us through these zones, Matt. But let's start with obviously there's 5 zones for those of you that don't know. We
Mm.
have zone 1 all the way through to zone 5/6. I mean, do you count zone 6?
Uh, I
I've heard
mean,
it online, but
I don't, but like it depends on. There's all different methods. There's some people do zone 5A, 5B, 5C. Some people do zone 6. I just run a simple 1 to 5. It's just so much
yeah.
easier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've only ever seen 1 to 5 in my programs with you.
Yeah.
But run us through what is zone 1 and we can kind of kick it off from there.
I think first, like, let's just what are zones, right? Like,
Yeah.
rather than break them down first. So zones basically represent different percentages of how hard your heart or how elevated your heart rate is, right? So like zone 1 is just sort of cruising around day to day. Georgia and I are in zone 1 right now. Zone 2, sort of 60 to 70% of max heart rate. Zone 3, 70 to 80%. Zone 4 or threshold is sort of that 80, 90%. Zone 5, VO2 max or maximal effort, just pretty much all out, is that 90 to 100%.
Okay, and so you were just talking about your max heart rate. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like we should start with that because your zones are all calculated off your max heart rate. Can you tell everyone at home how they work out what their max heart rate is, or is it a bit harder than that?
I mean, there's generic things like, what is it, 200 minus your age or 210
Mm,
minus your age? Can't remember exactly what it is. I don't really use that. I definitely, that's why we do our 5K time trial that we
yeah.
talk about. So I pull it from that. But there are a whole bunch of different, really, really simple ways you can do it. If you just Google how to find max heart rate and remove the equation, because the equation's just,
I feel like the equation's a bit too generic
yeah.
considering that everyone's at a different stage in their training. How can that apply to an athlete but also apply to a beginner?
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty relevant. Like it was just it's kind of like BMI back in the day, right? Like when they invented BMI, like it doesn't really hold weight today. So
Yeah.
I would just look up easy ways to calculate max heart rate workouts in running, et cetera, et cetera. You'll find something in Google super easy. But for us,
Yeah.
we do with the performance project, we do the 5K time trial, and that's we get rid of the first kilometer and then we average out the second to the fifth kilometer. That gives average heart rate at threshold and it gives us max heart rate.
Okay, so do you want to just go over quickly what threshold is after speaking about this? If for those who didn't listen to last week, I'm pretty sure last week's when I asked you what threshold was. That can you just do a really quick rundown of that, just in
Yeah.
case?
So threshold is zone 4. So 80 to 90% of max heart rate. It's the point where anyone who's done a high rocks or a CrossFit workout or
Mhm.
like some really hard sprints and you start feeling lactate in your legs, that lactic acid
Mhm.
burn, that's where our body threshold is basically the point, and we'll get into LT1 and LT2 later, which Georgia hasn't heard before. um,
Uh-oh.
LT2 is the point where your body can no longer clear lactate. So that is the threshold marker. So threshold
Yeah.
is just a fancy word for where your body can no longer clear lactate efficiently. And that's when we build up lactic acid.
I think when we first started training together, you explained it to me like a damn wall, and that's
Oh,
always
yeah.
kind of stuck with me and
Mm-hmm.
helped me with understanding if I've ever forgotten what it is. I just remember that there's a certain point, and then you everything goes over the damn wall.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you imagine a river, and at each zone, there is like a dam wall, and zone 1 is like a dam wall made of like sticks. And as it progressively gets further down, the dam walls get more solid, taller, harder for the water, or in this case, blood flow, to go over the zone. Obviously, max heart rate, that nothing's going over that because you can't go over your max. So basically, zone 4 would be a little bit less strong than zone 5, zone 3, a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less.
Okay, cool. So we've pretty much gone over the zones and what they are. So zone 1 is your kind of resting zone. What, you're just chilling, you're at
Everything. You're
home.
asleep. You're just walking
Yeah.
around, sitting on the lounge. You're in zone 1.
Yep. So you're zone 2. Now, everyone would have heard of zone 2, I am sure. It is quite the buzzword, especially on social media at the
Mm.
moment. Guilty, this gal does a lot of zone 2 content.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want to have a chat about zone 2 and kind of talk to everyone about how it's super important for your training? Or if you don't think it's important, who it's important for, what it's important for, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'd say the majority of the podcast will be about zone 2 because it is, like you said, the buzzword. It is also the cornerstone of every endurance athlete. I don't care if you are a marathon runner, a triathlete, Ironman, fucking open water canoer. It doesn't matter. You do a lot of zone 2 training. So zone 2, basically 60 to 70% of max heart rate. These are just generic numbers too, guys. Like, some people might be 72% to 58%. Some people might go all the way up to 75, 76. It all depends on your ability to clear lactate. That's basically how we measure it, right? So in terms of what zone 2 training is, it is our ability to take in oxygen. We spoke about this last week, sorry, about aerobic and anaerobic. Was that last week or the week before?
Yeah, last week.
Last week, cool. So we spoke about aerobic, anaerobic. Aerobic is your body's ability to take in air, turn its energy, move blood around the body. And zone 2 training is essentially making that more efficient. So you would have heard people say, what's the buzzword on socials at the moment? What do people always say when they talk about zone 2? Is it aerobic capacity?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So aerobic capacity just means your body's ability to breathe in, take oxygen out of your lungs, push blood around the body, and use that as energy.
Yeah. Okay. I definitely have heard a lot of that happening around on socials, but it kind of gets a bit confusing after a while. You just hear everyone throwing around all these terms, and there has to be an easier way.
Yeah, well, that's why I really get annoyed when I see people talk about aerobic capacity, but then they don't provide context because,
Yeah, that's what I find. There's just no
yeah,
context.
like I can say a whole bunch of like LT1, LT2. I can talk about that all day, and I can talk about it all day without telling you what it is. And I find people who just say aerobic capacity more often than not don't actually understand what aerobic capacity is or what threshold is or what lactate is. They just put it in chat GBT and go, cool, these are the 5 talking points about zone 2. Put them
Yeah.
into a reel, put it out there, and that's what they do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time people just want to seem like they know exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I always try and make sure, especially with my content, that it is able to be consumed by anyone and you can pretty much understand it or implement it. But zone 2 training has really helped me, I think. I think at the start, well, I know at the start I was very resistant to it. Probably a coach's worst nightmare.
It's 99% of athletes.
Yeah, and I have found that with a lot of people, especially my friends now who are doing zone 2 training themselves. They're a bit like, oh my God, this sucks. It's so boring. It's so slow, or I can't keep my heart rate down. And a lot of the time I just say to them, you say to me, slow down.
Yeah. So outside of like aerobic capacity and trying to be more efficient with oxygen, like what are the other benefits of zone 2?
Yeah.
The other main benefit of zone 2, and you could put zone 1 in this too, because this prep we've started doing some zone 1 runs with you. It's your body's ability to train for extended periods of time while minimizing central nervous system fatigue. And when we talk about central nervous system fatigue, if I gave you, Georgia, and anyone listening, a really, really hard like threshold run, top end, let's just say 5 by 1K, right? Or even your 5K time trial, that's even easier.
Yeah.
How did you feel after that?
I was wrecked after that.
Wrecked. And for hours after, right? Like you felt tired, weak, probably took you a little while to refuel, probably took you a little while before you wanted to eat and drink, those sort of things. That's your central nervous system. Even if you've gone out and had a big night on the drink and you wake up the next day and you forget the hangover feeling, but where you just don't feel like eating, drinking, and you like feel like you're in slow motion, That's central nervous system fatigue. So if you go out and run every single run hard, your central nervous system is cooked. You actually can't do as much training.
Yeah. Oh, and that was me, my first marathon training block. I didn't even read what the program said. I just saw 5K run and went for it,
Yeah.
which I don't even know how I got through that marathon training block, considering I was probably running at threshold every single run.
Well, you can, like, you will get fitter, like, you will progress if you just go out and run, like, regardless of heart rate zone, you will get better. It is the rate of progress while minimizing injury that obviously we're trying to maximize, right? So we want you to run as much as humanly possible, get as fit as humanly possible without you getting injured. The more fatigued you are, whether that is muscular or nervous system, the higher your rate of injury.
Okay. Yeah, I think that probably explains a lot for my first marathon training block. But for the zone 2 stuff we did, I found that, yeah, I definitely progressed a lot quicker than I would have if I hadn't have done it. Where should someone start if they're wanting to get into zone training, or especially zone 2 training?
So obviously the first thing is work out your heart rate zones. So for beginners, I'll give you a quick workout. Just do 1 to 2K warm up. Then you probably need to be able to run 7 to 10 kilometers pretty comfortably to do this specific one. But for beginners, 1 to 2K warm up, 5K time trial. You're going to take the average pace, average heart rate, and max heart rate from kilometer 2 to kilometer 5 of the time trial. And then if you go to Google, type in 5K time trial heart rate zone, a million different just generic algorithms will pop up. Put in the data. It'll get you in the 90th percentile in terms of accuracy.
Okay, that's pretty good. I mean, people can go off that. It's not
Yeah,
so
and
bad.
then you'll be able to tweak it. The more you run, the better you feel. You'll just get a feel for it.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you always update my zones for me, and that is why we did the 5 time trial the other day.
Yeah, and especially when you're starting out, zones can change in a matter of a couple of weeks because you're just progressing quite quickly. You get that newbie gains. So I would say go do a test. I mean, the other option, if you guys like really want to nerd out, is you can go and actually get like VO2 tested and lactate tested. You can do it places like a company that sponsors me and my Ironman Sydney Performance Lab. They're obviously in Sydney, but they do it. There's a whole bunch of different places that do it. I'm pretty sure University of New South Wales do it. All the big universities have a sports department do it. And it's relatively cheap, a couple $100, and they'll give you everything.
So they give you those zones. Is that what you mean?
Yep. They'll give you your zones, give you your VO2 max, all that sort of stuff.
And that would probably be more relevant for someone who's training for something, would it not? Or do you think anyone could go and do that?
I'd say like when we're just kind of getting out of our lane here, but like there are so many different health markers that are directly implicated with VO2 max. So like people with higher VO2 maxes later in life, like live longer, have less heart issues, less cancer issues. All-cause mortality goes down by, I can't remember the percentage, but a significant amount. There are a lot of just generic health benefits to knowing VO2 max and your training zones and issuing X amount of time into each zone as you age, regardless of performance outcome.
Okay, right. So, I mean, it is helpful to know those things. But for those of you who are probably just starting out, probably don't need to do it right away.
No.
I mean, a good watch usually tells you what your VO2 max and stuff is. While I know it's probably not super accurate, I know my Garmin tells me all the time that my VO2's increased or decreased or whatever it is.
Yeah. So all like Garmin, Apple Watch, all they do is they take. How old are you, Georgia? You are.
Come on, I just had a birthday,
Yeah, I
man.
know. Are you 30?
Just turned 30.
30. Good. I was going to say 31. I'm glad I didn't. I
Well,
got
you
that
just
right.
did. So, I mean, I'm glad.
So they would just take like women aged 30 to 32 who run approximately the same amount of kilometers, who live in approximately the same climate, and they just put it all into an algorithm, spit out a generic number, right? And that goes for men who cycle a lot, swim a lot, women who do whatever, like it doesn't matter. They just take all the consistent variables, put it together, and spit out generic number. So it's enough to get you started for sure, and like you could probably do it for a year or so, like, and it'd be relatively okay. But it is definitely not, if you want to actually progress and take things seriously, you need to sort of do a bit more accurate testing.
Yeah, I would love to go and do that. I know a few girls have gone and done it and said that the zones were definitely different compared to what their watch was saying.
Mm.
It would be interesting to go and do that, and I think it'd be a fun bit of content. I know I'm always looking at the content side of things, but it would be fun to find out and see how different it is.
Yeah, well, we might do it with the performance project. We might organize group testing or something.
Yeah, we should. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
So let's go back to zone 2.
Yeah.
That's kind of what a lot of people have been asking about, especially for me. It is the biggest question I get asked online is how do I improve my zone 2, or how do I make zone 2 easier? What would be your, for the sake of this, what's your top 3 tips in making zone 2 a bit easier?
Okay, so if you want zone 2 to be easier, chances are you're running too hard, right? Zone 2 should feel like almost like a walk in the park.
Yeah.
Like a slightly faster walk in the park. I would say top 3, like number 1 is just slow down. Like if you think, you put me on the spot here, Georgia.
Well, like for example, for when you say slow down, so let's just use me as an example. I think my regular running pace is anywhere between 5:30 and 6 minutes per kilometer. My zone 2 pace when I first started was between 7:30 and 8 minutes per kilometer. And so that was definitely a big change for me to go back to running quote unquote slower. For me, that was really hard for my head to get around. And I know a lot of women, just as an example, find it really tricky to go back to running slower because they feel like they're losing their, how far they've come. And for me, that was a big one, was like, oh, but I've worked so hard to get to this pace. Why would I run slower? I'm going to then just forever run slower. So I think, can you explain why I don't know what I'm kind of getting at. It's like, that
keep going. You're on the
running
right
slower
track.
like running slower isn't going to make you lose your progress.
Correct. So if running slow, we call it base building, right? Like that's so zone 1, zone 2 is your base. Now, what most people do is they ignore zone 1, zone 2, and they go zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, run as hard as they can for as long as they can. So they've got this vanity metric up the top where they're like, cool, I'm running whatever pace per kilometer.
Yeah.
But it's not built on anything. So as soon as I say to you, and let's just use an hour as an example. As soon as I go to that person, okay, cool, you can run a 6-minute pace for an hour and that's your PB. Run an hour 20 for me. I promise you that last 20 minutes will be a walk. There'll be no question about it. Now, if I go to someone who's been doing zone 2 training, who's got that solid foundation, even if they spent that hour absolutely flat out, they'd be able to jog that last 20 minutes. They'd be able to cruise back. You, after your 5K time trial, you've got a 1 or 2K cool down. You don't walk the whole thing. You're like, okay, after 30 seconds, you're able to jog again. That's because you've got this solid foundation that your fitness is built on. That's what zone 1 and zone 2, they enable you to build on top of it.
Yeah, and that's so true. I mean, after my 5K time trial the other day, had the cool down and I enjoyed it. I was like, oh, I can run really slow. And it was great.
Once people, I think zone 1, zone 2 it's hard for people if they're coming at it. And I don't like saying an ego perspective, but like it is a little bit egotistical if they're like thinking about their pace, like, oh my God, I'm running slower or whatever. Because we spoke about in episode 2, maybe. Like no one cares. No one's looking at your Strava. No one's looking at your average pace.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So when you get through that sort of first 4 to slower adapters, it could be 8 or 9 weeks. So let's just say 1 to 2 months, make it nice and easy. Once you get through that first 1 to 2 months of just sticking it out in zone 2, it starts to click and you're like, oh, this is actually really enjoyable. They're starting to take on an adaptation. You're starting to become more efficient with your oxygen, and you're able it's not much, but you're able, the pace comes down a little bit, and then it comes down a little bit more, and it comes down a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, you're just in almost like this meditative state while you're running. Like you're not even really thinking about running. That's a really good sign that you're like doing true zone 2 training, is you're not thinking about your breath, you're not thinking about anything. You're just sort of cruising along, just enjoying the day.
Yeah, I'm a bit like that. I remember the feeling of, I think it was about 3 months for me because the
You
first
were
month,
really slow.
yeah, I think the first month I was just really not wanting to do it, so I wasn't
Yeah,
taking
that's true.
it
Yeah.
seriously.
Yeah.
I remember I used to send you screenshots of my watch saying that I was in zone 2, or like my actual heart rate, being like,
Yeah.
look, I'm actually doing it. But
You would also go like, this is as slow as I could run, and your heart rate was like 163. Like, I can't go any slower. I'll be walking.
lies, lies, I didn't want to do it. But yeah, as I said, it was probably about 3 months to me. But after that, I definitely felt like it was a lot easier. I think
Mm.
I was probably sitting at that 7 to 7:15 pace, and that felt really cruisy for me.
Yeah.
I, when
And
it was tricky to run around that 8 minute. I remember I had to do a long run. It was like an hour and a half in zone 2, and I was like, this sucks. But after that, I think I did a 3 hour zone 2 long run once, and that was
yeah,
awesome. It wasn't very far, but it was awesome.
yeah. And that's the other thing too that I think people, it's probably a more nuanced approach, but when we talk about like your body wanting to adapt to training, your
Mm,
body doesn't understand pace. It understands effort, right?
mm.
So
Yeah, for sure.
145 BPM, that's, so I'll give you my training zones. My zone 1 finishes at 149 BPM. Um,
Which, as you so lovely told me the other day, was my marathon pace. So thank you for that. He's like, "Oh, my zone 2 is your marathon pace."
no, no. So I say that to say this. On that particular day, I was just feeling really, really good. So my pace was faster for less effort,
Yeah,
but my body didn't care about the pace, just recognized effort, right?
yeah,
There are days, so for context, I was running like 530 per K for 140-ish, high 140s. There are also days where I'll run 610 for the same heart rate. So your body
yeah.
doesn't care about pace, it cares about effort. It's about how hard it feels. So the pace is really an irrelevant number when we talk about heart rate training.
Oh, definitely. And also, there's so many other factors that play into zone 2
Heat, caffeine,
training.
sleep.
Oh,
Yeah.
so many. Caffeine was a big one, guys. At the start, I was still having my caffeine before a run, and Matt nearly wanted to
No, no, no,
lose
no,
his
no, no,
mind
no,
to
no, no,
me.
no, no. No, 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 no. You can have a
Oh,
coffee, you can have something before you run. Georgia was downing triple scooped pre-workout.
it wasn't okay, calm down. It wasn't triple scoop. It was one scoop of pre-workout, which is probably the equivalent of 2 coffees,
Yeah, at
which
least 2 coffees.
I now realize was a problem. And I had a bit of a caffeine, couldn't function without it. But now I can happily go for a run without any kind of caffeine beforehand.
Yeah. It's
So
just,
sure,
yeah,
don't have pre-workout before zone 2 run. Maybe
yeah,
have a
because,
coffee
yeah,
instead.
I think caffeine's fine, but that's definitely something people don't take into consideration when we're talking about heart rate training is external factors, right? So
Yep.
if you have a poor night's sleep, anyone who uses a Whoop or a Garmin, if you actually look at historical data, like you can go into the app and look at it, you will see resting heart rate is 5 beats higher, for example. So if your resting heart rate's 5 beats higher and you're not even doing any sort of exercise, what's going to happen as soon as you ask it to start what training? It's going to elevate even higher than normal for less effort, right? So they're the days where it's slower. Same with caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant, so it's going to raise your heart rate. Heat effect, I think it's when it gets over 27 degrees, it starts affecting your heart rate 1 to 2 beats per 3 degrees. Like all of these things, people don't necessarily, same with humidity as well, but all these things people
Oh,
don't
yeah.
necessarily take into consideration. They try and put it all on the same level playing field when it's just not that simple.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's days in Sydney where it's 90% humidity, and I'm like, there's no way I'm
Yeah.
getting a zone 2 run in today. It's just not
Yeah.
happening.
And then the, and just so we make this a little bit more, I know we're sort of in the weeds a little bit, we're getting a bit technical. Beginners starting out in zone 2, it is okay to do 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes of really, really slow running as slow as you can manage. And if you're still not able to regulate pace and your heart rate gets, let's just call it above 150 BPM, that's a pretty generic number for most people, zone 2, walk until it comes down.
Totally. I still do that now. Even now,
Everyone
if
does. I still
I'm
do it now. I'm
finding,
training for an Ironman, training to run a sub 3.5 hour marathon, and
yeah.
I walk all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And people, I know every time I've posted a zone 2 video on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, a lot of people still say to me like, "Oh, I can't run slow, or I run and then I need to stop and walk. Is that okay? Like, is it okay if I walk?" And of course it's okay. If that brings your heart rate down and makes your zone 2 run more enjoyable because you're not panicking about trying to get it down and not being able to, walk.
Yep.
It's the quickest way to drop your heart rate.
Yep, I had a 2 hour long run today, and where I live, it's quite hilly. So whenever I hit a hill, I'm like, cool, I just run the bottom third of the hill, I walk to the top, and then I just run from there. Like, just because I don't want my heart rate to elevate out of that zone. So
Yeah.
a little bit of self-discipline, but yeah, like just don't be afraid to walk. Don't be afraid to take it easy. It's okay.
So you've mentioned obviously slowing down, taking into consideration your external factors like sleep, caffeine, and then also don't be afraid to walk.
Mm-hmm.
3 really great tips for your zone training. I've got a couple that I've learned personally from.
Can I just add one more?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
One.
So the generic rule of thumb is 80% of your running should be in zone 2. So 80-20. That's kind of the split. 20% high end, 80% bottom end. So if you just look at your running, if you're doing 3 runs per week, for example, 2 are zone 2, 1 is a threshold, a race specific run, whatever you're doing in your program. But the majority of your running should be zone 2.
Yeah, so that could look like your Monday recovery run is in a zone 2. You might have a midweek speed interval session, which is your threshold run, and then you might do a Sunday long run in a zone 2.
Yep, exactly.
Perfect.
I know that's 66%, but it's still the overwhelming majority.
Yes, I got what you mean. I'm sure everyone else did.
There'll be someone in the comments who goes, "You said 80%, but it's 66.6."
Oh, no, thanks. I can't deal with that today.
We love you guys. Comment on everything. It's okay.
Yeah, I know we do love your comments. So my other tips are, if I learned this very quickly from the start, if you're trying to do a zone 2 run, probably best not to do it in a run club. I really struggled with that at the start. That would program me a 1 hour zone 2. I would try and do it at my run club, and every single time I was never ever in a zone 2 because I wanted to keep up with everyone, and 2, I was just chatting too much. And I know you should be able to keep a conversational pace in an easy run. For me, I just get too excited, and my heart rate rises from the
So
excitement.
that's a really good one. Is if you do want to run easy, probably don't run in a group because again, external factors. Being around people, you're excited.
And their zone 2 is probably different to your zone 2 anyway.
100%.
So it's very hard.
It's just, again, recognizes effort, not pace, right? So like Georgia and I, if we were running true zone 2, we couldn't run together.
No.
But we're both experienced enough runners where we can regulate our pace and our effort to bring it to one another, and we could run together quite comfortably. It wouldn't be an issue.
No, definitely. And I mean, even Nick and I, he is training for quite a similar time to me. But even this morning, we went on a zone 2 run, and there was quite a few times that I had to say to him, like, Nick, chill out. Can you drop back a bit? Because I can't keep trying to keep up with you because it's bringing my heart rate up.
Yeah.
And so then he'd have to drop back, and then that's kind of the dance you do when you're on a zone 2 run with someone else. But we didn't talk the entire run. So like we ran together and we kept each other company, but we didn't talk because otherwise my heart rate would be through the roof.
Yeah, and that's another thing that you mentioned was conversational pace. So it's when just starting out in doing zone 2 training, easy training, it's a really great indicator is if you can nasal breathe the whole time. Now, if someone has like a deviated septum or you can't get full oxygen in through your nose, take it with a grain of salt. You understand what we mean. If you're able to sing the alphabet, so
that's a new one.
C, but without changing your cadence and your breath. So if you get to D and you have to go, you're running too fast, right? You should be able to sing it like you're in preschool, like just rolling through it, not change your cadence. It's.
Thank God you run out alone in the country there, Matt. I can
I'm
just
just
imagine
singing
you
by
singing.
myself. People like, there's that kid's learning his alphabet again.
Can you imagine me running around Centennial singing the alphabet?
I'm gonna make you guys do it. I'm coming down. We're gonna do a training weekend in a couple of weeks. I'm gonna make you guys all sing the alphabet while you run.
We'll be like that scene from Camp Rock. Camp Rock. All right, cool. So another, before we get too off track again, another tip I've got is if you're on a long run doing a zone two or any run really, and you want to listen to something, don't listen to like a 180 BPM playlist. Obviously that speaks for itself because it's meant to raise your heart rate, but listen to like an audio book or a podcast.
Yeah.
I found that's a really good way to kind of, one, take my mind off things, and two, it's nothing unless you're listening to like, crime docos. I've done that too, and I trust me, that is not good for a zone two. But yeah, they're really good. I found audiobooks. It's a great way to smash through an audiobook.
100%. And that's another, like, just a little hack. If you are listening to audiobooks, listening to Beyond the Finish Line podcast, for example, if it's you got the headphones in and you're running and all of a sudden you can't hear it and you've got to keep turning it up, running a bit too fast, right? You should be able to listen to that at like your normal walking around, I guess for you, Jordan, walking around in the city sort of volume, because it's a little bit louder than out here in the country. But as soon as like you're like, oh, I've got to turn my podcast up, just slow down a little bit, give it a couple of minutes and just see if that volume regulates itself, because then you'll be like, okay, I was probably, my heart rate's a little bit elevated.
That's a good one. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, if you're having to turn it up, that's a great one.
When you think like if you finish a really hard run, like you can't hear anything. You're just breathing, can't hear.
True.
Like you could have music blaring in your ears. You got no idea what's going on.
I like that. That's a really good one. Other than that, I can't think of any other kind of tips besides, don't talk to people. Listening to an audiobook's a really good one. Stop and walk. I do that all the time.
And just be disciplined.
Yeah,
like,
it is discipline.
It goes aside. Like like we said, no one cares about your Strava. No one cares about your pace. Like you're training for you. Do you?
Yeah, and look, if you think people care about your Strava, which they don't, but just chuck a little zone 2 run on the captain,
Oh yeah.
Classic. I do that all the time. This is
lots
a
of elevation. Run. That's the good one. Then you hide the elevation.
Oh God, Strava kills my life. Seriously. I have to remind myself to get on and give people kudos because anyway.
Oh yeah.
So enough about zone 2. Talk to us a little bit about zone 3.
Yeah, now we're starting to get a little bit interesting. So zone 3 is like your moderate effort, like 70 to 80% of max heart rate. Is
this kind of like a tempo run, would you say?
Exactly what it is, tempo, yeah.
There you go, guys. You've probably heard that one before.
Tempo, marathon pace, like race pace, pretty much any sort of race pace outside of like a 5 or a 10K, anything where we're sort of getting over that hour marker, you want to live in zone 3. So zone 3, depending on how fit you are, like for example, my Ironman, I pretty much want to stay in zone 3 for 10 hours, right? So like you can stay in it for a long time. It just takes obviously a lot of training. So yeah, this is for anyone who's training for any sort of race where you're going to spend a good chunk of time of your training.
Yeah, and this is, for context, everyone, this is where I kind of live when I'm trying to do my marathons. I know Gold Coast, I think you said I was about 6 feet over.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, so again, this is why for the beginners, I don't want to discourage you or put too much information in your head. But the difference between, like we'll take Georgia, for example, she went 6 beats over into zone 4, right? And that might not sound like a lot, but your fitness levels that go from zone 3, where you might be able to hold it for Georgia, 4 hours ideally, drop down to 2.5, 2 3/4, something like that. And she didn't cross over, obviously, at the start. So, she might have lost 50% of her her ability to 50% of her endurance. So the more dialed you get, it does make a big difference.
It definitely, I think, what is it, 33 kilometers or whatever, where I think I hit that threshold and then
Yep.
that's where I crashed.
Yeah, you just spent too long above threshold. Your body couldn't clear lactate anymore. That's probably why you started getting sick. And, you just didn't have anything left to give. It's like, again, we talk about aerobic and anaerobic. Like, if you can't take in enough oxygen to fuel yourself, like, you can only do so much.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I started to feel really dizzy, seeing stars, felt like I was going to faint.
Yep.
Had
Your
to
body,
solve.
you couldn't keep up glycogen needs, couldn't keep up
Yeah,
oxygen needs. Yeah.
yeah. And so when I had that really sugary electrolyte drink, it made me feel so sick because I just, was working too hard. But we learn and we move on. So what would be, I guess you could probably could we give someone who's listening a bit of a tempo session? It's a good one they can probably do during the week, or when would you be
Yeah.
doing a tempo session?
Let's just talk about like in zone 1, zone 2, we spoke about like what the stimulus is, right? Like we want to build aerobic capacity. So we want our body to be super efficient, breathing in, using that oxygen to create energy so we can run. Zone 3 is this weird sort of, a lot of people call it gray area training. Because if you spend a lot of time in zone 3, you don't really get the benefits of threshold training and you don't get the benefits of zone 1, zone 2 training. And it's where a lot of people live because it is that sort of, it's kind of a weird zone where it feels kind of easy, but you are working relatively hard based on heart rate. So what we're trying to do in zone 3 is basically an extension of zone 1, zone 2. And this is why it's really important to build that foundation of zone 1, zone 2. Zone 3, your body is starting to produce a little bit of lactate. So you've gone over, I will go at the end, we will do lactate very, very quickly and it'll put some things in context. But when you go over 2 millimole of lactate, that's when your body, oh, George is already rolling her eyes at me.
I'm not rolling my eyes. I'm like, this is
She's
getting
like,
real
here he goes.
I'm like, oh God, I'm losing it. It's fine. I'm listening, I promise. I'm thinking this is getting very nerdy.
It is, but like, it's important.
Is this important?
Yeah. So,
Okay, good. Keep
so
going
like
then.
originally, like if we go back in the history of heart rate zones before they got these trendy names, there was just LT1 and LT2.
Yep.
LT1, your body gets over 2 millimole of lactate. That's where your body starts to recognize it has lactate in the blood. And then when it gets to 8 millimole, that is where your body can no longer clear lactate, right? So that is LT1, LT2.
Yep.
So
That's the I want to pass
zone,
out phase.
yeah, so that's zone 2 and zone 4, right? And everything else kind of didn't matter. You're either under LT1, in the middle, or over.
Yep.
That was original marathon, Ironman endurance training. So zone 3, you are training your body to carry on from zone 1, zone 2, increasing your aerobic capacity, but you're also training your body to clear lactate. So your body's only sort of drip feeding lactate into you. You're taking that lactate, turning it into energy, right? So your body's using multiple different energy sources. That is sort of the point of zone 3, that you can live in that area, clearing lactate and not creating waste in your legs. So if you see people using like recovery boots, like Normatec boots or endurance recovery boots, what those boots do is clears like metabolic waste that comes from lactate out of your legs. If you're really, really efficient at clearing lactate, you need them less and less. That is sort of the stimulus of zone 3.
Those
in the
boots
most
are
efficient way I
amazing.
could possibly say it.
This is why we work well, Matt, because there's people out there that want to know the nerdy stuff, and there's people out there like me who are just confused all of the time.
Well, I agree. And that was kind of our concept of the podcast. We're kind of like
For
fire
sure.
and ice, where I'm just
Exactly.
a million miles an hour and you're just happy and smiley and
Passionate, I think they
passionate.
call that. Passionate.
I'm very
Passionate.
passionate, just our passions go in different ways.
Yeah, you are. That's what I mean. You're
Yeah.
passionate about this stuff. So,
Yeah.
we know what zone 3 is,
Mhm.
but what would be, like, just going back to what I said before, what
Yeah.
would be a good kind of zone 3 session for
Yeah.
someone? Like, how do they know, or how do they stick to zone 3, or how do they do a zone 3 session? What does it look like?
Yeah. So if you're starting to be concerned about zone 3, like, am I training in zone 3? you should really have some idea. You should have a fairly accurate idea of what your zones are, and probably been doing at least a couple of months of consistent zone 1, zone 2 work, or even just zone 2 work, and some threshold stuff. So sprints, intervals, things of that nature. After that sort of, let's just call it 3 months to make it nice and easy, you should have a pretty good idea of what those zones are, knowing what your zone 3 is. A good session. So, Giorgio, I give them to you all the time. Back end endurance 1 through 8. Back end endurance. So we start with sort of 2Ks, really, really cruisy, sort of zone 1. Just depends on how she's feeling.
Yep.
Then we sort of go anywhere from 4 to 8 kilometers. Again, zone 2.
Yep, we do.
Yep, a little bit higher intensity, not much, just 3 or 4 beats higher. And then we go into what we'd call our back-end endurance. So we might do 4 by 500 meters at marathon pace. So I keep it really easy for Georgia rather than running off heart rate. We just go marathon pace. She knows the paces she needs to hit for her upcoming race.
Yeah.
We just live in that world. Again, it gets a little bit nuanced. Sometimes Georgia is out of zone 3 in those runs, but sometimes keep this as quick as possible. Sometimes we just care about pace rather than heart rate, but that's a conversation for a different day. That's a nuance of training.
Yeah. Also, I think that's something I prefer. That's a personal preference thing, right?
Yeah, like we are at the end of the day, we are training your body to run at a certain pace, right? Like, the more time you spend at that pace, the more efficient you become. You adapt. Stress and stimuli makes the muscle grow. That's how it works. But yeah, so do your 8Ks at zone 2. 4 by 500 at race pace, 500 meters, easy in between. That easy can be a walk, or if you have been doing your zone 2 training, you'll be able to do a nice easy zone 2 jog. The following week, you might go to 4 by 7, exact same warm up and zone 2, 4 by 750 with a 250 meter cool down, 250 meter easy in between.
Then making up that kilometer, so you've got a full K there.
Yep, 4 by K, and then we'd go into like 5 by 800, and we'd start building out in different ways.
Yeah, they're good sessions. I like those ones. Yeah. I especially like the 500 meter ones, but but no, I'm only kidding. The 800 meter ones with the 200 meter rest, I actually think I like the most.
Yeah, like they're good, honest marathon sessions. So, again, like when we spoke about that 80-20 split, even in Georgia's harder marathon runs, if you break it down, she's doing sort of 8 to 10 Ks zone 2, and then only, even if we said 5 by a K, 5 kilometers of her, what's the total, 7 or 18 Ks for that one? 5 Ks out of the 18 kilometers is at zone 3. So she's still, overwhelming majority of her running is done in zone 2. And when you do your threshold work, the overwhelming majority is done at zone 2. Like you've got a 5 by 800 at threshold, and you've got 2 to 4, you've got your warm up, you've got 2 to 400 meters easy in between plus a cool down. Still, the overwhelming majority of a hard session is at zone 2.
Yeah, and I think these sessions are they're similar to each other. It's just at 800 meters where you're working instead of working at marathon pace. So there's zone 3, zone 4, you then work at the threshold pace, right?
Yep, exactly.
Pretty much
pumps up that heart rate. Yep.
Yeah, so for those of you who may have, if you either write this session down and do this session, or if you have an interval session that you love, they could technically do that, but just at a slightly slower pace instead of at that really hard. Is that right?
In terms of tempo and threshold?
Yeah, like if they, they might already have a threshold session or an interval session, as I like to call them, like a speed session. They might already have one that they've been doing for a while that they really like. The layout.
The only caveat to that, yes, you are correct. The only caveat to that is duration. So it is much easier to go from zone 2 to zone 4, 5 because it's max effort. It takes a lot longer to regulate pace and control heart rate to sit in that zone 3. So if I, for example, said if we took pace out of it and I said zone 3 heart rate for 10 by 100 meters, by the time you got to 90 meters, your heart rate would then start to move. So zone 3s need to be a little bit longer. I'd say probably at least sort of 400 or 500 meters if you want to sort of live in that world.
Right. Okay. I see what you mean. So instead of doing a really short, sharp session, you've
Yeah.
got to make sure that they're over a bit of a longer period.
For zone 3, yeah.
Yeah, for the zone 3, I mean, like as I've been doing between 500 to 800 or anywhere up from that.
Yep. Well, I think
And
you've
then
got 1.5. And anyway, different conversation.
there's
Can't help
always,
myself.
look, I don't even look at my program until the morning of. I don't even know what's happening this week.
You're so different. I know. I've studied mine. So I have a separate coach because I can't trust myself. But I study mine the moment it comes out. I know all the sessions. I know what I got to hit days in advance.
We are so different.
Yeah.
It is so funny because I kid you not. I think I woke up this morning and I was like, right, cool, an hour, off I go.
I've got a hard bike in 2 weeks. I've already messaged my coach 3 times about it. They're like, cool, I don't understand this part. What stimulus are we trying to hit? What are we doing? Fueled, unfueled? Like, where are we at? Blah, blah, blah. And he was just like, dude, it's 2 weeks away. Relax. I'm like, nah, like I need to know.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
Can't do it. Yeah, look, I sometimes depends. I think sometimes I'll look ahead. I think when I'm deep in marathon training, I will definitely look ahead at the long runs, but I don't look. Otherwise, I sit there and I dwell on it. And I don't want to do this run. You know what I mean? If I just wake up and I know I've got to do, my regular Friday interval session or my threshold session, whatever you call it. But if I don't look at it beforehand, I can't be worried about it. I just get up and go.
Interesting.
Little hack for you, my friends.
There we go. I'd be interested to know how many people look ahead and like go, cool, yep, this is what I want to do. And how many people are like Georgia and just like rock up and be like, what are we doing?
Yeah, a little bit of that. A little bit. Yeah. It honestly, Nick gets so mad at me, guys. He's just constantly like, Georgia, like, come on, you've got to look ahead. What's the set? Like,
yeah, good man, Nick.
I'm like, oh no, I don't care. I just want to do it. Anyway, we could waffle on about this. So we've talked a little bit about the threshold, which is zone 4.
Yep.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that before we spend too much time chatting about other things?
Well, I know you say spend too much time, but I do think like for beginner runner, even intermediate runners, having a solid foundational knowledge on training zones will elevate. It's great. Yeah, will elevate your training astronomically because when I started running, I didn't know anything about this.
Yeah, no, neither did I.
There was no resources. There was no running wasn't popular on social media yet. Like, it was look it up and sort of read about it. So I think even if this podcast is a little bit longer than what we normally do, it'll help people astronomically.
So zone 4, tell us about it.
So yeah, zone 4 is 80 to 90% of max heart rate. This is where sort of 30 to 60 minutes. Nothing, if you can run longer than 60 minutes in zone 4, you're not running hard enough. This is the point. So when we speaking about lactate before.
Yep.
Threshold is, and how it got its name, is you have crossed the threshold. So you've gone over that damn wall where your body can no longer clear lactate efficiently.
Yeah.
So there's nothing fancy about it. It's just your body starts to accumulate lactate. We've also crossed into that anaerobic phase. So we're relying on the oxygen currently in our body. So obviously our body stores oxygen in blood cells, red blood cells.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're living. That is threshold. So you've crossed over the barrier. Your body is starting to accumulate lactate. You've only got a finite amount of oxygen and glycogen. So glycogen is the energy that comes from carbohydrates. You've only got a finite amount of everything. Once one of them maxes out, you're done. So either you accumulate too much lactate, you run out of oxygen, which I'd recommend not doing, or you run out of glycogen, which is essentially carbohydrates, sugar in your body. One of those maxes out, you're done. That's threshold.
This feels like a dumb question, but
no dumb questions. You know that.
No. Is that the same as lactic acid, or is that different?
Yep, lactate and lactic acid, exact same thing. Yep.
Okay, so it's that feeling you get when you have been on a hard session, you stop at the traffic lights and you start to feel your body like really.
No traffic lights out here, mate.
Yeah, well. Hey, for me, there's 2 traffic lights on my way to the park. That's why I run the same route all the time.
Yeah.
But yes, so that feeling like, guys, if you've been on a long run in the city, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sorry, Matt, you probably don't know what this is
No
like.
idea.
A city is a place with really big buildings. Don't know
Never
if
heard
you've
of
ever
it.
experienced that before.
No.
Never heard of it. Right. So, yeah, when you stop
Happy with
after
my
a long
cows.
run, yeah, you stop, and then you just feel that kind of, it's not like a pain, but
It's just a burning.
it's a burning. Yeah, it is. So, right. So that's when you've kind of hit that
Yeah.
too much lactic acid. That, um, yeah. So, how often should we be feeling that?
So within that, as we spoke about 80-20, within the 20%, I would say somewhere between 10 and 15% is that. Probably 10% is zone 3, and then the remaining 10% is sort of that interval high zone 4, zone 5. It can vary depending on where you are in your training cycle. So for example, Georgia, if we were going to get you ready for a really, really fast half marathon, we
Mhm.
would want to spend a good chunk of the early part of your base building phase. Really, we wouldn't even touch zone 3. We would do a lot of zone 1, zone 2, a lot of zone 4, zone 5. That grey area in the middle, we're not really worried about.
Okay. So, okay, so this the sessions we were just talking about where you're doing kind of that same tempo session, but with that higher, faster.
So for you, it'd be like the where is Georgia at sessions.
Yeah.
So for example, you might do a 20-minute warm up, nice and easy, zone 2, 10 by 100 at. So Georgia's marathon pace is 5:30. So you run your intervals at about 5-minute pace, 4:50, somewhere in that window,
Yeah.
off the top of my
Somewhere
head.
there.
Yeah.
Depends
So
on how hard I'm going, but yeah,
yeah.
sometimes
So
depend, and it also depends on the distance as well.
yeah, yeah. So you 10 by 100 at. I always say it's the hardest effort that's not sprinting. Like it's a really good sort of indicator for beginners because most beginners have sprinted before and they've run really easy before and they understand, cool, this is sprinting, just got to take it back just a fraction and then you're fast running, right? The reason we don't sprint, sprinting creates injuries. We're not sprinters, we're endurance athletes. So 10 by 100 with like a minute easy in between, 10 by 200, and you start the following week, 10 by 200, maybe 45 seconds rest, 10 by 300 down to 30 seconds rest, 10 by 400 down to 20 seconds rest. And then we'd go to 7 by 800. Is that right? You've done it.
Yeah, I have done it. I have done it. I was going to say the first of those are my favorite sessions.
No,
Those ones where I can
it's
go
6
really
by
fun.
800, 6 by 800, because that's 4.8 kilometers. And you'd have, and the rest goes back up. So then you go to 1 minute rest, then you go to 5 by 1K, and then the rest starts coming back down again.
See, Matt looks at me as if to say, you've done this session, but I wouldn't know because I don't read these sessions.
Yeah.
I just go, oh, yeah, my watch says I have to do another one.
I can't live my
I
life
do,
like this.
I do say that, but Matt actually does write little notes in the sessions. I do read those, like, but I read them as I'm at the park warming
She's
up.
reading as she's cooling down. She's like, I did that wrong. Fuck.
No, no, no. I do. I read them when I get to the park. I just don't read them as I'm laying in bed the night before because then I'll just freak out about it. So
You don't do it the night before. You do it like at the start of the week. I put them out on Sunday. You read it Sunday. You're ready for the week.
yeah, see, Nick does. Nick reads them.
Yeah. Which is odd because I never hear from Nick.
Because he's just cruising.
No. But like Georgia will message me all the time, and I'm like, "Is Nick alive?" Like Nick was sick all last week, all red. Didn't know, no idea. And I was just like, yeah.
Nick's just You'll come to know that Nick is just cruising. He
Oh,
does
I'm
not.
well aware. It was just
He's,
funny how
he-
polar opposite you guys are.
he's yeah. I was gonna say he should be a pretty easy person to coach because
Yeah,
there's just no notes. He's like, okay, cool.
yeah. Doesn't
And then
leave
yeah.
training notes. Doesn't get back to messages. Just doing his thing.
Oh, he's gonna get in trouble now for that. I'll be like, excuse you, why are you not getting back to Matt?
To be fair,
Oh,
sometimes I leave him on red as well because I know he's just not going to read it. So I'm like, I just send him a thumbs up.
boys, men, hey, they're
Efficient,
cruising,
simple.
efficient. Anyway, they are fun sessions. I do like the sessions that are a lot quicker too. I love a fast session. Although recently, Matt has just told me, I'm just going to quickly get off track. He's just told me I can't wear my super shoes for a while. You want to tell everyone why you've banned me from wearing super shoes?
Yeah, so super shoes. I'm trying to think of. So for super.
Like for example, I was wearing my old race shoes
Yeah.
or my Magic Speeds, which are like a tempo run shoe, but they've got a carbon plate in them. I was wearing those for my threshold sessions.
Yeah, so basically what I was going to say is super shoes, carbon plated, super foam. That's why they got the name super shoe. Very, very light. They are basically designed for one thing and one thing only, and that's running fast, right? They're not good for easy runs. They're not good for...
That's why we love
They're
them.
not... Georgia. So when you... I look at super shoes probably differently to most people. I look at super shoes as a crutch, right? So in terms that it's something you rely on, something you lean on, something you become dependent on, right? That makes sense?
Yeah. It makes sense.
When we remove super shoes and we just train in your easy shoes, your Nova Blasts, your something without a carbon plate, you actually have to work a little bit harder. Not much. It's only nuance. Like the benefits for you in super shoes is, I think I worked out somewhere between 2 and 4%. So it's not massive. You have to work a little bit harder. You have to work a little bit harder with your leg turnover. You have to just be a little bit more conscious, and your body then adapts to that. It doesn't have that crutch to lean on. It doesn't have the carbon plate. It goes, oh, the carbon plate's gone. I have to work a little bit harder. And then you adapt to that. So then when we reintroduce super shoes,
it makes sense.
The benefits go from 2 to 4% to maybe 5 to 6%, right? Which isn't massive, but it is 5% less hard you have to work in a marathon, and that is a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And I understand why I'm not supposed to be wearing them. It's just funny because I was like, oh, no. And they are one of those things that is more mental than anything.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to, because it works the opposite way. You come to race day and you're like, oh my God, I get to put on the super shoes. Like now you're dreading going, I can't wear my super shoes. All I want to do is wear my super shoes. Come marathon time, it flips. Come the very specific marathon workouts, it flips and you're like, I'm on. Like you start getting into that mindset.
So fun, for sure. And as you said last week, it's after a certain point that they actually become you've got
to run a certain pace for them to work.
Yeah. Thank you. I couldn't get what I was saying out. Yeah. You've got to run a certain pace for them to work anyway. Yeah. So a lot of the time it is mental anyway, but it's good. It's changing things up a bit. I've got to start wearing, normal shoes and really work that bit harder. So
yeah, and just for while we're on it, and we might do a whole different episode on shoes, but people might have just heard that and like, what do you mean you need to run a certain pace for carbon plates to work, right? So if we just think about carbon plates as an energy transfer, that's what shoes do. They absorb energy to propel you forward. Carbon foam can obviously only absorb a certain amount of energy because it's soft. Carbon plates absorb more energy to propel you forward. If you're not running fast enough to put the force in the plate to make it bend, to propel you forward, it actually slows you down because you're just putting more and more pressure on your feet, risk of stress fractures, and it's actually a net negative even over a 5K. So for people who are out there and they're like, I want to put on my super shoes, unless you're able to run really sort of under sub 530 consistently, and that's being generous, you're really getting no benefit, and you'd be way better off running in something like a Nova Blast that's a little bit faster, but it's got different foam in it.
The Sauconys that
the Saucony, the Curano, something like that. I can't remember what it is from Hoka. Anyway, non-carbon plated shoes, a little bit faster.
I think it's the Mark in Hoka.
I think they're carbon. I could be wrong.
Oh, I don't know. Anyway,
just non-carbon plated shoes that we spoke about in Running 101, where you've got the big thick wedge, which one a little bit less, half the amount of foam. That's a relatively good baseline to go off for like a tempo speed shoe.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think Look, those shoes are comfy anyway. I just
Super comfy. And
super comfy.
you'll become a better runner. If you do more work in quote unquote less fast shoes, you'll become
Yeah.
a better runner.
Yeah. So all those alpha flies in the wild are
Still my favorite page. Never
screaming in
gets
their
old.
boots.
Some dad in jeans just walking down the street is the best.
I mean, yeah, and guys, you're going to save money because you're not going to need your super shoes are going to last you longer. So,
Yeah, and you only get like some people don't know, you only get a couple hundred Ks out of them. So
yeah, you do. I don't think people really know that especially your alpha flies. Your alpha flies were only built for 100 Ks
yep.
at that pace.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
just remember that at that pace. And I mean, marathon runners are running elites are running insanely fast, so they're getting even less out of them.
Yeah, most
It's
of them
like,
are one and done with the shoes.
yeah, well, those Adidas ones that came out,
They're designed for one and done, yeah.
they were done for, yeah, one and done. Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so last one we haven't talked about is zone 5.
Yep.
What's zone 5? I feel like I didn't realize there was more than just the threshold. What?
So zone 5 is like VO2 max. That is just maximal effort. I'd say untrained people, so beginners, 30 seconds is the pace that you can hold for 30 seconds and you are cooked. So think sort of 200 meters.
Is that like a sprint or?
Just
I know we're not supposed to
technically
sprint, but-
yes. Technically, yeah. Like
Yeah.
if you do a 100-meter all-out sprint, you've hit VO2 max. Like that's why all those guys are cooked afterwards. So yeah, that we could use that as a all-out sprint, but really 30 seconds to sort of 3 minutes. Like for me, I'd be somewhere in that high 2-minute range of being able to hold that pace. So,
And this is kind of like your red zone if you're training high rocks or
yep,
if
red
you're
zone,
at the
yep.
gym.
Just all out.
Yeah, I
It's
remember.
like when they go 30 seconds left and you've just got to send it.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, I used to go to a gym where we had to wear the heart rate monitors, which
Yep.
I still wear to this day. But yeah, a lot of the time the trainers would be like, "You're not in the red, you're not in the red," and I'd be like, "I'm dying." Oh dear, I know on that sprinting machine where the curved sprinting
curved runners,
machine,
yeah.
I think I could only do like a minute in the red on that. Which
Yeah,
is
and
like
that's
90%.
VO2 max. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. Like you are, again, we talk about those damn walls. So zone 3 to zone 4 is lactate threshold. So that's when we cross over. When we cross over to zone 4 to zone 5, that's when the alarms are going off. It's like, hey, you've got 30 seconds to 3 minutes, and 3 minutes we're being generous before everything's shutting down.
Right. And so is that kind of like 30 seconds over the entire session or 30 seconds at a time or
30 seconds at a time. So
right.
Like for example, the 10 by 100 session we spoke about earlier, if we just elevated your pace a little bit and increased your rest, you would be able to do that. But 10's probably pretty high for VO2. We'd probably do sort of somewhere between 5 and 8 rounds, 5 and 7 rounds of VO2. Because again, the fitter you get, and we spoke about your body's ability to clear lactate, when you are in zone 5, so let's just say you do a 100-meter sprint, it takes so long for your heart rate to drop down into zone 2. Like you'd be there for 10 minutes before you could run again. But it drops down to zone 3 quite quickly.
Okay.
That's when your body starts clearing lactate, right? So we're sort of going back around. That's why it's really important to be efficient in zone 3, spend some time in zone 3 because your body gets good at clearing lactate. So you're able to do these higher end sessions as well.
Yeah, and that's why we want to also keep a marker on how long it takes us to get from that really high end zone all the way down again.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So everyone should know now what the zones are. Is there anything else you want to tell everyone?
Just quickly, guys, I took a whole bunch of notes for this. I tried not to look like I was reading, so I hope that came across. The only other thing I'll add is...
Because this is your domain, so I don't want to cut you off.
No, it's fine. We'll do a more nuanced episode, potentially, where we might just talk about zone 2 and give a whole bunch of training sessions and things like that, which would be good for people. And we could do it for each zone, or at least the important ones, zone 2, 3, 4. So when we talk about base building, zone 1, zone 2, and when we talk about zone 4, zone 5, I like to picture them as the floor of a house and the roof of a house, right?
Yep.
Now, if you want to run faster, which would be increasing your zone 4, zone 5, you must increase the floor. So the gap between zone 1, zone 2, or the floor and the roof, is always the same, just for this analogy. So if you want to run faster, you must raise your floor. You cannot raise the roof without the floor coming up. Doesn't work. Yeah, raise the roof, Georgia. Give it to me.
How do you raise the floor?
Zone 1, zone 2 training.
Just keep training in that zone.
That is your base, your foundation, your floor training. So the higher up you build your floor, the faster you're able to run. That is why you see people running 4 minutes per kilometer at 130 BPM, for example, like those professional marathon runners, because they just their floor is so high, they're not even working. Like they're so good at taking in oxygen, turning it into energy, and being able to turn their legs over that they're not working at that pace.
And so I guess, so that would be like how my original zone 2 was 138 or I don't know, or higher, whatever. You want to try and change the zones to raise the floor. So your zones get better and better.
Yeah. And just in terms of better and better, everyone's got different heart rate zones. So zone 1 for me is 149 BPM. Zone 1 for Georgia, I think, caps out at about 142, right? Something like that. There's guys I train with who do Ironman. Their zone 1 is 110 to 120, and they can run 5-minute Ks at that pace. I can sit at the same pace, but I am 20 beats higher, and we're still in the exact same training zone. So this is why it is important to go do some testing, even if it is the 5K time trial. It's not in the lab, but not everyone is the same. Just because Georgia posts, I'll just use my guinea pig, Georgia. You posted today, capped at 140. That was in the caption, because I put it in the training notes. Yeah, I put in the training notes. But that doesn't mean that everyone else's zone 1 training is 140.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't mean that you have to be doing the same, And people always say that to me. They're always like, oh, what should I be running? What's your zone 2? And I'm like, well, my zone 2 is irrelevant to you.
Yeah.
About what I'm doing.
Literally, your weight, gender, all sorts of things come into how trained you are, obviously. I'll leave everyone on this, and just like, if you are completely new, no idea where to start, just try and keep it under 150 BPM.
Yeah.
Do that for a month. 3 runs a week, 2 runs a week, something like that. Keep it all under 150. After that month, start to have a play, start to look at some tests that you could possibly do, or reach out to us. You can reach out to me, ask for a test. I will give you the best ones. I'll tell you exactly how to do it. I'll even give you your results if you give me the data.
Matt loves a bit of data, guys.
It's fun.
Send Matt all of the data.
Send me your race results, your running data. I will give you training zones. I'll help you out best I can.
Yeah, definitely. No, he is serious though. That is something that's really helpful. So thank you. But yeah, that is all the zones. I really hope this was helpful to beginners, as well as maybe some people who've been running for quite a while and want to get into their zone training a little bit more, take it a bit more seriously. It's been really insightful. So thank you, Matt.
All good. And I did try and keep this as concise as possible, but if there's something we missed or something we didn't go in deep enough, send us a message on Instagram. I might even do like a Q&A on the stories or something. And
whoa.
Yeah, I know, right?
Matt doing something on social.
Hey. My Instagram.
I know, I'm very proud.
And YouTube, mate. I'm all over YouTube, TikTok, and fuck off.
Oh gosh, thank you so much for listening, guys. It has been absolutely wonderful. Always love chatting on here, and hopefully you have enjoyed this too. So as always, please like, subscribe, follow us, leave us a review. That is super, super helpful. Leave us a comment. I saw some comments on our Spotify the other day, so that's awesome. And follow us at beyondthefinishline_pod on Instagram.
And we're on YouTube. So
we're on YouTube, guys.
Well, by the time this episode goes out, we're on YouTube.
And follow us
Technically,
on
we're not on
YouTube.
YouTube, but by the time you guys listen to this, we are on YouTube. Like, subscribe on YouTube. If you're like me and you like to consume podcasts that way, we'll put all the reels on the shorts and all that sort of stuff as well.
Cool. Awesome. Well, have a great week, guys, and hopefully we'll be in your ears again next week. Actually, no, we will be in your ears again next week.
Yeah,
Stay
we've already
tuned.
recorded the episode. All right, see you guys.
Bye.